remember the sound before I remember the sky. The bells. Not the calm, measured tolls of morning prayer, but a wild, endless ringing that tore through the rain like metal screaming against itself. I was the last priest left awake in the rectory. The others had gone silent hours before the storm began. I thought they were praying. Later, I learned they were not. The village lay below us, a sprawl of roofs drowned in crimson rain. Every flash of lightning showed faces turned toward the church, hundreds of them waiting for sanctuary. Yet the gates were sealed. From my window I saw them claw at the iron bars, their voices lost beneath the thunder. They said the bells called the faithful, I wrote in my journal, but no one came to answer. When I went to the door, the great lock glowed faintly red, as if it had been forged in fire. I touched it and felt my heartbeat stutter. The metal was colder than death, and it hummed with something alive inside. Behind me the hallway smelled of wax and dust. Statues lined the walls, saints whose faces had begun to melt in the heat of the candles. Their eyes seemed to follow me as I searched for the keys. Father Seraph Hale had kept them in a wooden box under the altar. The box was still there, but the name etched on its lid had faded until only H.E. remained. I took it anyway. The first key was black iron, curved like a serpent. I held it up and whispered a prayer that stumbled on my tongue. Then I turned toward the gate. Rain struck my face as I stepped outside. The square was empty now, only the wind and the smell of burnt incense. The bells thundered overhead, and I realized they had not been rung by any human hand. I reached the gate and pressed the key into the lock. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, a deep vibration passed through the ground, and light burst from the keyhole, red, searing, almost holy. The lock clicked open with a sound like a gasp, and something inside me vanished. I didn't notice at first. It was subtle, a thin strand cut from the weave of memory. But when I tried to recall the name of my closest brother in faith, the one who had shared bread with me every dawn, there was nothing. A blank. The key slipped from my hand and fell into the mud. I knelt to pick it up and saw my reflection in the puddle. My eyes looked the same, but behind them was an echoing absence. The bells rang harder. I backed away, terrified of what else might unravel if I touched another lock. The rain tasted of rust. Somewhere beyond the walls, a child cried once and was silent. I returned to the chapel and found the floor slick with water. Footprints led from the entrance to the confessional, but they stopped at the curtain. I pulled it aside. Empty. Only a smell of smoke remained. When I closed my eyes, I saw flashes, the gate half open, 1,000 hands reaching through, not human, pale as bone. I told myself it was fear. I told myself I still believed. By dawn, the rain had turned to ash. The bells had not stopped. I counted 43 tolls before losing count. In the courtyard, the first lock hung open, bleeding light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The iron gate shuddered with each chime, as though something enormous breathed behind it. I wrote again. If the bells are his voice, he sounds afraid. That was when I heard the whisper. Do not open it, Arlen. It came from inside the church, a voice shaped like mine but lower, hollow. I turned. The pews were empty. The candles bent backward, their flames drawn toward the altar. I followed the sound down the nave. Each step echoed twice, once in front of me, once behind. When I reached the altar, I saw the statues bleeding from their knees. The blood crawled down the marble in perfect lines, spelling 2 words. Faith forgets. My breath caught. I tried to pray, but the words tangled. Wrong order, wrong meaning. In your light we see, I couldn't finish. Something moved in the dark rafters just outside the reach of the candlelight, a shape cloaked in white, watching. I thought it was Father Hale, but when I called his name, the shadow folded into itself and was gone. The second key lay heavy in my palm. Silver, etched with verses I no longer recognized. I knew what opening another lock might cost, yet the gate seemed to draw me. The bell's rhythm shifted, slower now, pleading. The air carried the scent of wet stone and something older, like blood left too long on iron. I knelt and prayed one more time, quietly, to whatever still listened. Then I set out into the ash. The village was gone. Houses reduced to silhouettes, people to dust. Only the bell tower remained standing, cutting through the red mist like a blade. At the gate, I inserted the second key. The ground screamed. Light poured upward, a column of white fire that swallowed the sky. The wind hurled me backward. My journal pages scattered into the storm. When I stood, the gate was still locked, but the key had melted into the metal. I felt the loss immediately. Faces, 2 of them, faded from my mind, a man and a woman smiling in a field of wheat. My parents, though I could not name them. I fell to my knees and cried, not for them, but because I understood the pattern. Every lock I opened took a piece of who I was, and there were still 3 more. I slept for a handful of minutes on the cold stones beside the nave and woke with my cheeks stuck to wax. The bells hadn't stopped. They never stopped. Their rhythm had thinned, though, as if the tower itself were running out of breath. When I stood, I realized the pews had shifted while I slept. 2 rows had angled inward, narrowing the aisle into a throat. At the end of that throat, the confessional waited. Its curtain had grown heavy, damp as a tongue. I didn't want to touch it. I did. "Do not open it, Arlen." The whisper again. No source, no breath, just the shape of words made out of chill. I pressed my hand against the wood. The confessional felt warm from within, like an animal that had just vacated a den. "Who are you?" I asked. "If you're him, say so." Silence. Then a knock from inside, polite. 1, 2, 3. I opened the door and stepped into a hollow. I did not close the screen. There was no point. The lattice had dissolved into strands, and between them, the other side, was only night. I smelled wet rope and burnt linen. The whisper became a voice. My voice. Lower, frayed. "You're doing this to be good," it said. "You will end the siege of the bells and bring the people in. It will make you righteous." "I am doing this because it's right." "That's the same lie," the voice said, almost gently. "There is no right. There is only what you can survive and what you can't. You'll open every lock and call it faith, but listen." A long breath, like wind inhaling the rafters. "Faith forgets." I pushed out of the confessional so fast the curtain tore. The word bled through the fabric in slow, crawling letters. Forgets. I backed into the aisle and found I was not alone. The white-cloaked figure stood near the font, hands folded, hood lowered over where a face should be. Water in the stone basin trembled, not from movement, but as if something beneath it were knocking from the wrong side. "Father Hale?" I said. The name sounded unowned, like a word I'd borrowed and owed back. The figure lifted a hand and tapped the bowl with a knuckle. The water changed. It clouded, then clarified, revealing a slab of iron beneath the surface, a coffin lid, notched with 4 keyholes and one that had been filled with metal and cooled. The second lock. I watched the ripples spread across a sky contained inside a bowl. "You closed the gates to keep them safe," I said, "or to keep him safe." The figure lowered its hand. I could not see a face, but I knew what his silence meant. Mercy and cruelty share a wall. On nights like these, the wall eats. The bells staggered. Somewhere above, a mechanism slipped teeth. The note bent into a groan before it righted itself and blazed on. I took my journal from the step and wrote by the light of a candle stump. Either the bells are a prayer he cannot answer, or they are a prayer he refuses to answer. I don't know which terrifies me more. The candle guttered. When the flame steadied, the white figure was gone. In the ash that had settled on the tiles where he'd stood, I could read a pair of knee prints pressed deep as if bones had knelt there for years. The prints filled slowly with seeped water, becoming two little mirrors. In each, I saw my face, and behind it, a door. I left the church. The square had acquired drawings overnight. Chalk, I thought first. Childish loops and stick-limbed saints with round heads and smiles big enough to split. But chalk does not glisten. These lines did, wet and grainy. Tiny hands had used ash mixed with tears to draw what they wanted, a church with doors wide and people streaming inside. The little figures had no faces. Where their faces should have been, there were empty circles. The first sound I heard was not bells or wind or my own heart. It was a knuckle on iron, small, rapid, embarrassed by its own insistence. I turned and saw them, 4 children, the oldest no more than 7, clothes slick with red rain dried to crust, hair matted with grit. They were almost translucent around the edges, like paper burned but not yet ash. "I can't let you in," I said before they asked. "Not yet." They didn't speak. They pressed their hands through the bars as if the metal were water. Their palms were pale and cool. When I reached to touch one, my fingertips hissed and smoked. Not pain, a wrongness, the way a word feels when spoken in a dead language. The smallest child tilted her head. She had no whites in her eyes, only gray. She lifted something toward me, a bell clapper, no bigger than a thumb. It must have fallen from above and found her. She closed my hand around it, and I felt the residual warmth of the tower. A heartbeat that wasn't mine. "Where are your parents?" I asked. I knew, but we lie to little ghosts out of habit, as if lying were gentler than truth. They turned their heads as one and looked through me at the church. Their mouths opened. No sound came. Then all at once they were dust moving in a wind that did not stir the trees, dust with the memory of shapes. They slid back across the square and into the drawings. The ash lines drank their outline and brightened as if the children had returned home to a picture of one. A moment later, the picture faded. Only blank stone remained. I leaned my forehead against the bars and shook, not with rage, with an empty, precise grief that did not recognize me. I had never wanted children, but now, in losing the image of 4 that were not mine, something maternal and strange in me rose and broke like glass. When I could breathe, I rang the clapper against iron. It made no sound. The bells above answered anyway, as if obeying a signal sent only by intent. I went to the gate and laid my hand on the 3rd lock. The metal pulsed like a living throat, swallowing, waiting. I tried to pray and found the prayer had been erased cleanly from the slate of my mind, the way a tide smudges the names we write in wet sand. "Without faith," the voice in my skull murmured. "What are you opening for?" "For them," I said aloud, though the square was empty. "For anyone left." "For yourself," the voice said, almost tender, "so that the act will mean you." "I would rather be a door than a man," I whispered. "If he won't open, I will." The 3rd key was colder than the first 2. I did not remember where I had found it or when I had placed it in my pocket. Symbols ran its length like ants, fish and eyes and hands lifted in blessing, all devouring one another. A hairline fracture split the bow. I wondered what would break first, iron or me. The moment the key's teeth touched the lock, the sky inhaled. Clouds drew inward, a spiral turning, revealing a pupil of white. The wind stopped. I could hear my own blood in my ears, each beat a footstep approaching from behind. I turned the key. The tower convulsed. Bells tore free and fell, not straight down, but as if dragged sideways by a hand I could not see. One shattered on the nave roof. No sound, only light. A sheet of brightness flooded the courtyard, bleaching the world until shapes became cutouts in a holy glare. The statues on the facade broke delicately at the neck. Heads struck the stairs and rolled, halos scratched into the stone. In that light, I saw the village as it had been, one heartbeat of mercy, a vision, or a cruelty. People ran with baskets, with babies, with bread. The window shutters banged. A dog snarled at a sudden thunder. A woman lifted her arms and called my name with a voice I had known as lullaby. Then, nothing. The picture stripped from the wall. The paint peeled away. White underneath, blank. I staggered backward and dropped the key. It did not touch the ground. It hung in the air between lock and hand, held there by the memory of metal. When I reached for it, my fingers closed on light and closed on nothing. The loss hit like an absence of weather. I did not forget a person. I forgot a presence. The shape of him. The temperature of a room where a prayer has just been said. The feeling of being watched by something that loves you enough to judge you and judge you enough to love you still. It went out of me like breath shaken from a drowning man. I tried the old words, Kyrie, Dominus, Pater, and they were the names of strangers whose hands I would never hold. I dropped to my knees in the smoking dust of the shattered bell and pressed my forehead to iron. Whoever you were, I said to the place where he had been, I am still here. Wind resumed as if a conductor had lowered his arms. Ash lifted and swirled. The third lock stood open, its mouth humming, a pitch too low for human organs. The bars of the gate trembled with a shiver that made my teeth ache. Above, where the tower should have been, the sky had a new seam, as if two heavens had been stitched together poorly with wire. Through that seam, a thin light leaked, neither day nor night, the color of an exhausted candle. I took up my journal with hands that did not feel like mine and wrote a line I could barely see. If faith departs, does mercy remain as memory or as law? When I looked down, the words had rearranged themselves into a language I recognized only by shame. The last sentence dissolved. Letters fled into the margins like ants. In their place, a narrow script crawled up from the page's bottom edge, written by a hand that was not mine. Do not open it, Arlen. I turned the page, the same line there, and on the next, and the next, my whole record overwritten by a single command, spoken in the voice already growing inside me like frost, my voice without belief. I closed the journal and laughed once, softly, a sound that came out as steam. I hear you, I said to the absence, and I will not obey. I stood, swayed, and put my shoulder to the gate. It did not give. Somewhere deep in the structure, gears shifted, mechanisms older than the church, older than the town. The open locks clicked to some hidden rhythm. Two remained, two prices unnamed. Behind me, the white-cloaked figure knelt where the ash drawings had been. His hood lifted, just enough for me to sense a face like a candle flame. There, then thinner, then gone. He made a small sign in the air. Not a blessing, a tally. 3. The seam in the sky widened during the walk back to the nave, as if some inattentive seamstress had tugged the thread too hard. I carried the broken clapper in my pocket. It beat a dull rhythm against my thigh, not time, not heart, something older that the body still remembers when the mind does not. Inside, the church had grown long. I do not mean it looked longer. I mean distance had increased. What required 10 steps now required 30. Between pillars, a thin snow fell, not cold, settling a script on the floor, names I could not read. I followed the trail to the side door and found it ajar, breathing. A hall waited there that had never existed, sloping downward into the belly of the hill. The Hall of Names. Walls of stone, each block carved with letters. At first they were sharp and legible. As I moved deeper, they blurred like faces in rain. When I touched one, grit came away on my thumb, the last dust of someone once beloved by heaven. I wiped that dust on my cassock and felt like a grave robber. Halfway down, the lamps went out. A softer glow rose from the stones themselves, a milky luminescence like bone catching moonlight. In that pale, the names began to unwrite. Eleanor lost her vowels and became LNR, then L, then nothing at all. A blank that drew the eye as a wound draws a fly. I hurried. I don't know why, as if moving faster might outpace a tide. At the end of the hall, a mirror waited. No frame, only polished obsidian anchoring the wall. I lifted my candle and saw myself, gaunt, ash in the brows, soot on the cheek where I had slept on the nave floor. And behind me, nothing. No reflection of the corridor that should have been there. Only a room made of the same black stone, and in that room, a man standing, head bowed, hands clasped behind his back with a scholar's patience. He lifted his face. Me, without a shadow. He smiled like a teacher who has called a child to the front of class. You came farther than I guessed. You have been speaking to me, I said. My voice struck the mirror and returned thinner. You wrote in my book. I corrected your book, he said, and the polished stone fogged for an instant with breath I could not hear. You were making a category error, confusing virtue with appetite. I put my palm to the obsidian. Cold spread up the nerves of my arm, leafing through them like pages. Who are you? The believer without belief, he said. The shape of a sanctuary when the God is moved out. You made me when you unmade him. I did not unmake him, I said. I opened a door and found it led to a wall. His smile softened. That is all theology is. A polite name for the geometry of walls. He stepped toward me in the mirror. I could not help myself. I stepped toward him, too. Our palms met at the stone, not touching, but the sensation was exact. The ridges of the print, the old scar across my lifeline from a kitchen knife, the warmth that should not be there, the mirror thickened to water, or faith, or both. He leaned. I leaned. The surface broke with the sound of silk tearing. When he came through, the lamps in the hall relit as if afraid of the dark between us. He had my face but not my fatigue, my hands but not their tremor. Every sound in the hall sharpened, the drip of condensation, the whisper of dust as a single letter slipped loose somewhere along the wall and fell. He glanced at it without interest. We are going to fight, I said, surprising myself with the certainty. He nodded. Only so that you can stop pretending this is anyone's fault but yours. He moved first. No flourish, no taunt. Just a forward step and a flat strike of his hand against my chest that rammed me into stone. Something cracked, not bone, memory. A picture shattered. The rectory's winter stove. Father Hale's fingers blew with cold as he fed the first fire of morning. Ash fell from the ceiling like confetti at a cruel parade. I lunged, clumsy with rage that wasn't sure where to land. My fist hit his jaw, and pain shot up my arm. His jaw was iron hammered into the idea of a man. He slipped sideways and tapped my temple with 2 knuckles. Another thing broke. The voice of a woman singing bread into the house, a tune I had lived my entire childhood inside without knowing its name. The world lurched. Please, I said, unbecoming word, but honest. Stop. You asked for this, he said, and laid a hand on my shoulder. No pressure, only contact. But my right knee sank, as if the floor had learned a new gravity that applied to me alone. You wanted a price that made you innocent. There is no such currency. I reached for the only weapon I had, the keyring at my belt. 2 keys hung there now, the first black and serpent curved, the second silver melted into the metal of the gate but present here as symbol, and the third cold enough to burn. I closed my hand on the third. It hummed. It sang a note that the bones in my wrist recognized as choreography. He cocked his head. Yes, he said, use the instrument of your forgetting. Appropriate. I swung. Not with the key, but with the ring itself, metal whipping a bright arc. The blow cut his cheek, No blood. Light. A fissure opened in his skin, glowing like sunrise through a mountain's fault. He frowned, touched the wound, considered his luminous fingertips with the curiosity of a man examining a moth. "Interesting," he said. "You still believe enough to hurt yourself." He came hard then. We collided along the hall, shoulders splitting stone, names stuttering into dust under our heels. He struck me in the throat and I gagged. I drove the crown of my head into his sternum and heard a sound, like a bell rung from the inside. The world twinned, hall within hall, fight within fight, the physical layered over the symbolic. With every impact, a different memory sheared away, pages torn from a binding that did not resist because it had learned it was kinder to go. He pinned my wrist to the wall, face an inch from mine. No breath, only the idea of breath, and ideas are heavier. "Admit it," he said. "You are not opening the gates to save them. You are opening them to become necessary." "I admit," I said, choking, "that necessity is a mercy when you have nothing else." I brought my knee up and through, vile trick from before the cassock, and he loosened long enough for me to wrench free. I drove the third key under his ribs, not a stab, an insertion. The metal slid in as if his flesh had been machined for it. His mouth opened, no cry. Light poured out, hot enough to cauterize the cracks that had formed in him and in me. "Together," I whispered, forehead to his, "not so that I'm stronger, so that I'm whole." He stared at me, eyes my eyes, but emptied of imploring. The key turned of its own will. Teeth aligned, tumbler clicked. Not a lock in a door, a lock in a man. He folded into me with the gentleness of a coat being put on in slow weather. For a moment, I felt twice as balanced and then twice as heavy, like a scale with both pans weighted. The hall flared. Every name along the walls returned, letters racing back into grooves like rivers reversing. For the length of a breath, I could read them all. My parents, the children of Ash. Father Hale's given name, Seraphim, not Seraph. No one had called him that in decades. The list widened until it included things that had never properly had names. A kindness done without witness, a dog that kept vigil beside a grave until frost took it, a bell that rang at the right moment because a farmer's hand slipped. The flare died. The names dimmed again, not erased, only sleeping. Faith, it seemed, also required rest. I came back into the nave carrying a silence inside me that did not belong to absence. Outside, the air had gone knife-bright. The seam in the sky unzipped to the waste of the world. The tower groaned. The bells, those that remained, tightened their ropes like muscles. I walked to the gate. 2 locks gaped obediently. The third hung ajar, humming. The last 2 waited with the patience of old laws. Behind the bars, nothing moved. Not people, not wind, not even dust. It was as if all motion had been commanded to kneel. "Explosion," I said aloud, to no one, and to him if he listened. Then silence. Then revelation. Let it be useful. I set the 4th key, brass, cross-hilted, into the waiting mouth. The moment it turned, the church exhaled everything it had ever held. Candles blew sideways. Glass left the windows in a single sheet as clear as water and broke against the square like rain remembering it was glass. Statues toppled with the courtliness of men excusing themselves from a ruined party. The tower released a last bell, and it burst mid-air into a corona that painted the world in soundless gold. I stood like a nail in the beam of it. Somewhere along the blast, my hair lifted, my cassock snapped like a flag. My journal tore free and sailed, and none of it touched me. The ring in my pocket burned a perfect circle into my thigh. I could smell the iron of my own blood turn to him. Then, silence. Not the friendly quiet of cloisters, the surgical stillness of a theater just before the first cut. In that stillness, the last lock felt suddenly light, as if it had decided in my favor. I held the key above it and hesitated only long enough to know the difference between trembling and reverence. I opened the gate. No world waited, no people, no courtyard, only a depthless white that was not light exactly, but the thing light is made from before it learns color. I stepped across, and my shadow refused to follow. It clung to the threshold like a dog that knows thunder better than men do. I did not fall. I did not walk. The white held me as water holds a body that stops trying to swim. Within it, voices murmured, all at once and singular, like every prayer ever said underwater. I recognized none. I recognized all. "Is this you?" I asked, teeth barely moving, as if sound might bruise the silence. No answer. Then, as gently as a hand moving hair from a fevered brow, a shape leaned out of the white. Not a man, not a woman. Not anything with a pronoun. A presence that did not insist. It smelled like stone left in sun and lifted at dusk. It sounded like the breath a mother takes before deciding not to wake a sleeping child. "You went quiet," I whispered, "so we made noise." The presence touched my chest where the key lay under cloth. I did not feel fingers. I felt recollection, a simple act of being recalled to myself. The empty rooms of me filled, not with furniture, but with the knowledge that rooms exist. "I cannot carry all of them," I said. "Their names, their lives. I'm small." The presence did not disagree. The white thinned to a fog, then to air, then to the ruined square. I was on my knees at the gate, forehead against iron that no longer hummed. The seam in the sky had sewn itself shut with invisible thread. The bells, what the blast had left of them, hung still and humble like tin cups on a nail. Across the stones, my journal lay open to a page that had not existed yet. On it, a line in my hand. Perhaps the gates were never meant to open for men, only for faith. I wrote beneath it, slower than I have ever written, "But faith can inhabit men, even while they forget. What sleeps in us is not dead." The ash drawings on the square returned. I don't know when. The children were there too, 4 of them, only as suggestions, their lines faint, but the faint has its own defiance. I touched the nearest outline with the back of my knuckles, warm. When I lifted my hand, gray clung to my skin like a blessing I hadn't earned. I closed the gate, not locked, only closed. The keys sat in my palm like teeth offered by a docile animal. I took them to the altar and set them in the wooden box under the linen, where Seraphim, had kept them. The name on the lid had sharpened, all letters restored. "Will you speak again?" I asked the empty air. The question felt less like a challenge than a courtesy. A breeze moved the sanctuary lamp. No flame burned there. The oil had spent itself hours ago. But the casing swayed as if answering with the grammar of small motions. I understood none of it and found I did not require translation. Outside, a woman crossed the square. Not ash, not memory, a woman. Her hair was short and filthy. Her hands were cut. She carried a basket that held nothing. She approached the gate and lifted her eyes to me as if I were an altar she had not chosen and would use anyway. "Are we allowed?" she asked. The words were ordinary. They were the first ordinary thing I had heard in a long time. "Yes," I said, voice gone hoarse with relief I tried not to exhibit. "Come in." She stepped over the threshold and did not burn. The world did not rip. The bells did not cry. Somewhere in the rafters a bird shook ash from its wings and failed to fly only once before succeeding. It felt like a sermon none of us had written. That night, after I fed the woman and the 3 who found the courage to follow her, I walked alone to the nave and sat where the floor dips from the endless kneeling of centuries. My shadow lay at my feet and behaved. I set the clapper beside me and waited to see if the bells would ask anything of me. They did not. The silence was thick as bread. I ate. Before I slept, I wrote the last page the way a man writes a will, without adornment, intending mercy. If you find this account and you do not remember me, that is well. I was not meant to be remembered, only the act is. If you find the gates closed, do not swear at heaven. Knock for a little while and listen. If you hear nothing, ask anyway. If you still hear nothing, open what you can and pay what you must. Faith forgets, yes, but faith also returns the way bells do, exactly when a hand, even a small hand, touches the rope without thinking. I blew out the candle. In the dark, something like a voice moved through the room, not words, only warmth. I placed my palm against my breastbone where the key had turned. A faint ticking answered, neither clock nor heart. "It is enough," I said into the quiet, which received the sentence and did not argue. Far above, one remaining bell rocked once in a breeze I could not feel. It did not ring. It remembered how. And that, tonight, was sufficient.
The bells, they never stop.